I think the more that, especially as believers, we can really challenge ourselves, like, where do I find my identity? Like, is my identity, like, what's really important to me? Is it centered around my faith, or is it centered around my uniform?
Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oak Show. Glad to have you with us once again today, and looking forward to a great episode as always. And I hope that you are having a great week. This is a new season, of course, as we're transitioning out of the summer, getting into the fall, wherever you are. Maybe it's colder or less cold. Here in California, not much has changed. But looking forward to all that this season brings, and I hope that you are as well. But again, thank you for listening. For those that are listening over at Mojo 50, thank you for listening there. Always a privilege and an honor to be able to share our message with you, and thankful for your listenership there. For those that are listening to the podcast, thank you for doing that as well. And for both of you, I would encourage you, as I do every week, go to YouTube. Find us on YouTube. You can look for us. Go to YouTube, search for the Mighty Oaks Foundation or Mighty Oaks Foundation, Mighty Oaks Programs. Any of those will get you there. You'll find our channel. Subscribe to our channel, and then hit the notification bell. A lot of folks subscribe and never make it over to that notification bell. Hit that bell. That will let you know when new content comes online. Love to share that with you as well. And please take some time, if you would like to, leave us a comment. If something that we say today, something that maybe you would like for us to say in the future jumps out at you, go ahead and leave us a comment, share this content out, and that would be awesome. And then finally, I point you as often as I can to our website. That's where really everything about our organization is found, links to places for you to apply to a program if that's what you're interested in, to support our program, to learn more about our program. Lots of resources that we put there. And I've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks, but we've also added a watch feature. So if you go to our website, on our homepage, up at the top, the menu bar there, you'll find the word watch. It's very simple, watch. Click on that, and no surprise, you'll be able to watch. All of our content is there as well. So I wanted to share that with you. Again, thank you for joining us. Really looking forward to today's conversation. And today I have the privilege of having back as a guest someone that we had maybe a year ago or so. I don't know how long ago it's been, but Chaplain Emile Moured is with us, now newly retired. And so if you're not watching this episode, you need to go just check it out and look at the retired beard. It's amazing. I don't know what it is about service members. All of us, every single one gets out of the military and immediately we grow a beard. But yours actually looks really good. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for the time, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I think we both recognize, first of all, that we are so thankful to our God and to Jesus Christ for bringing us together in this family where you and I, we've actually never met in person. We've had
that's right,
phone conversations and Zoom calls, and I have this kindred spirit with you.
Yeah.
It's very popular these days when, like, a UFC fighter like Vitor Belfort or Chad, pummel the snot out of somebody to then turn to the camera and say, and I want to thank Jesus Christ. Right. It's kind of ironic, but he really does empower us for everything, for the fights that we all engage in real life. So thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat.
Of course. You're at a different stage of your life now than you were the last time we talked, but for those that may have not caught the last episode, let's take a few minutes. Just give us your military background, where you came from, why the chaplaincy, some of those questions that you've probably been asked 1,000 times in your career.
Wow. Yeah. Well, first of all, you mentioned that I was on the program. It had to have been a little over a year ago, because I remember I had one of my fresh COVID shaves. I didn't, the barbershops all shut down on base.
Right.
So I, like everybody else, I somehow found a razor on Amazon that wasn't $500. I just went to town every day.
Right.
And so people who saw that are like, is that really the same guy? Anyhow, yeah, so I just retired after 28 years as a Navy and Marine Corps chaplain. It was about 21 plus years on active duty. All that previous was reserve time, mostly with Marine Corps down at 1st Marine Division. I really just thank God for grabbing a hold of me at a young age. He shared his gospel with me through a local pastor who just basically laid it out. If you don't know God, if you haven't accepted Jesus' forgiveness, you're fighting the battle all by yourself. Furthermore, you're not reconciled to God, and that's probably not good news when you go to meet him. And that made sense to me as a young man. Shortly after, I'd always planned on going in the military because my dad was a World War II infantry vet, fought in Europe, and just kind of was part of my DNA.
Yeah.
So I ended up as a ROTC midshipman. I was going to fly with the Navy. I had everything I wanted, and God just sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I got something different for you."
Yeah.
And that began that the beginning of a very long journey as a chaplain. And I just had a heart to serve God and to do that in the context of the military. So for me, at that point in my life, it was a very easy pivot. And it's weird. I mean, I'm sure you felt the same way when, you get to the end of that particular race in life, or that leg of the journey, and you're like, how is it over already? Like, you feel like you just started, but it is what it's part of life, right? It's been a joy and a pleasure.
Life is weird that way, but it's good to be able to look back and say it's a joy, and I'm happy that I did that. One of the questions, and this isn't something you and I had talking about, but one of the questions that I was asked, I think even this week, was about chaplains in the military right now and how challenging it is to be chaplains. I've been told, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've been told that there's a shortage of chaplains coming into the military. What is your view of the chaplaincy, as it stands right now? And I know it's a very challenging time to be a chaplain in the military.
Well, again, what a privilege for me to be able to be in that ministry where you're right, for at least in the Navy and Marine Corps. Even for those who are listening, that don't know, the Marine Corps gets their chaplains from the Navy. So that's why when you hear me putting those together, that's why. And it's actually, so does the Coast Guard. They get their chaplains from the Navy as well. For most of my career, we have either not met our recruiting goals or just, as we sort of surged and there was an increased demand signal for chaplains, there was a lag in meeting that. So there's always been a need for chaplains, and certainly as the Navy in particular expands and tries to put chaplains on all the different ships that we have out there, especially as they're disaggregated and chaplains have to be on a ship for those people to get care, the demand just continues to increase. But I would tell you that the bigger challenge is always in having godly, God-fearing, believing chaplains out there that are being the kind of pastors that can give an account when it comes time, when they stand face to face with God, and he's either going to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant," or "I never knew you," or whatever. Because reality is, Jeremy, and you know this, that chaplains in the different chaplain corps in the military services, they're sort of like ministers, using a very kind of broad term, in the civilian world. You open up the yellow pages, or I guess we don't have yellow pages anymore, but
back when we had them,
the equivalent to that is online, and you look at, you were to look at churches or places of worship, and you'd have everything from A to Z. And the Navy, because as a country we promote freedom of choice, freedom of worship specifically, and your choice within what you choose to believe, they provide for all different kinds of chaplains. Now I'm a Christian chaplain. I'm specifically, a conservative evangelical. So I'm looking at it through that lens as well, not just as an American, we need to provide for folks to worship as they choose, but as a Christian, I have a passion and a responsibility to specifically represent and to preach Jesus Christ. And I will tell you that we can always use, especially if you have any listeners right now who are in the military or thinking about going to the chaplain corps and haven't been in either way, you can always use good, committed, qualified people to stand up and say, "Here I am, send me."
Yeah, that's good. And the difference between a chaplain who's engaged and one who isn't is huge. I've been a part of units that had both, and to have a chaplain that's there, particularly in an infantry unit, is there. And there for an infantry unit means in the field doing the things that are difficult and dirty and tiring, and having one who's not. You come to me if you have a problem. Man, the difference is incredible. So qualified spiritually certainly, and from a biblical sense, of course, and engaged and passionate about what they do. Yeah, so thankful for those good folks who are out there doing the work. Yeah. You are, I'll say going through, I think you've gone through or you're moving through a transition. And transition in any career is difficult. I've mentioned this before. My mom worked for an insurance company for over 30 years and recently retired, and she's talked about just how difficult that retirement is and has been, and the transition from the day-to-day work and the relationships and all those things to not having that. I think transition is difficult. It doesn't matter how old you are, where you're coming from, but the military community is just, it's different. You wear different clothes, you use different words, you understand things differently, you look at the world differently, you're okay with moving your family every couple of years, you don't ask a lot of questions. It's a different world. And transitioning away from something that captures your identity in so many ways. This is who I am because this is what I do. And all of the things that go along with that, particularly when you've served as long as you have. You hang that uniform up in the closet for the last time, and now you're transitioning. This is, in our program, in our organization, I believe, one of the top few challenges that we deal with. So much of what is viewed as post-traumatic stress disorder and the relationship friction and issues and the substance abuse and all of that, people will say, well, it goes back to my service. Really, in many cases, it's because that transition has caused a loss of identity and a loss of purpose and a loss of direction. You're moving through that transition time. Can you talk about that a little bit? Maybe from your own experience or the experience of those that you've seen and you've helped. What makes that transition difficult? And what are some tools, some strategies that can be used to move through that in a positive way, to get you to the other side, to get you re-engaged with a purposeful life?
Great questions. So let me first say, go back to one of your first observations, that a critical part of any transition, at least for a male out of the military, is growing a beard.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, I'm mostly kidding, but there's a friend of mine who is in the area here who's now retired as well. He's a retired Army colonel. He's I believe, pretty well known in this Army Special Forces world because he served there as a chaplain for multiple tours. Mark Gauthier, but he said to me, he laughed when he saw that. He said he grew what he called a sacramental beard when he got out too, because he's since clean shaven again, but he said it was a reminder to him that he has hung up the uniform, that he does, he is not the property, so to speak, of the U.S. government anymore, that there has been this transition, and it just sort of mentally helped him make that transition between this is what I've been doing, but it's different now.
Right.
And I thought that was interesting. That's not why I grew this. I really just didn't like shaving every day. And
well, you were just talking about the razor that you bought during COVID, and I assumed that it got lost in the move or something. I thought maybe that was the thing, but
I don't even know if it's functioning anymore. But yeah, so I think people either subconsciously or consciously will either do things to help themselves realize, yes, this was part of my history, but I'm a civilian now, and I need to snap into this new life, or it's going to be hard. They either do that or they don't, and things hit them sideways. So the second thing that really stuck out to me when you were talking is, you talked about identity. You said it really has to do with your identity, and I fully agree with you. I can remember being a new chaplain and talking with a Navy chief who was about to retire. He was at a retreat that we were doing, and he was at a marriage retreat, and he was just having a real hard time, and I didn't know why. And I remember just he shared with the group. He's like, the Navy. I'm realizing it's almost been like this person that you're in love with, or like a really good friend, and I'm saying goodbye.
Yeah.
And it was at that, and he was just like overwhelmed with emotion, like what am I going to do? And there's this death of this relationship, but I realized too, it was so much more than that. It's that for many of us, especially because we come in as young men, young women, in maybe later formative years, we really end up sort of having that our identity shaped as being a Marine or
Yeah.
a sailor or
Yeah.
a war fighter, what an airman, a coastie, a soldier, whatever. But it becomes so much part of our identity. Like, we go home and we almost wear the uniform, even if we're in civies, because
Mm.
people are constantly coming up to us and thanking us for our service and asking us about
Yeah.
stories and all that. And, there's sort of pros and cons to that. But the bottom line is it's part of our identity. And so it's so hard when that's part of the core of your identity for so long to all of a sudden have that
Right.
mostly gone. Now, it's never
Right.
completely gone because we
Sure.
still have our brothers and sisters in arms that we stay in touch with, but it's different because you kind of leave that behind and you have to,
Mm.
and you're disconnected from it. I will tell you this too, Jeremy. For me personally, um, God has, in a lot of ways, just really protected me from a lot of things, and I think for me personally, the transition has not been terribly hard for this reason, which is I love my time serving sailors and Marines. I loved my the ministry that God entrusted to me
Yeah.
as a chaplain. But my identity, my primary identity, was
Right.
never in being
Right.
in uniform. Even when I was, a lot of people said, "Well, it's easy for you to say now when you're in '06 or whatever,"
Mm.
and but I would tell you this when I was in '03. I would tell people, I am not in it for promotion. I am not trying to stay till retirement. I am not trying to get, um, recognized or promoted. I'm here to be a representative of Jesus Christ, or a pastor, a chaplain, and yes, I'm a naval officer too. I'm a staff officer, and there's a lot of things I do, but that's never been my primary identity. And I can honestly say the day after I retired and I started growing this thing and started wearing civilian clothes,
Mm.
I think because of that reason,
Yeah.
it was not a hard transition for me. I mean, it was like I got out of bed and continued on with life.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the more that, especially as believers, we can really challenge ourselves, like, where do I find my identity? Like, is my identity, like, what's really important to me? Is it centered around my faith, or is it centered around my uniform?
Yeah.
Because as good as that is, that's not what it's all about.
Right.
Meaning I'm tugging on my shirt here. As great as my time in the military was, and as much as I just continue to have this passion to serve
Yeah.
our war fighters now as a civilian, and with this new camp ministry and whatnot, and even doing coaching and instruction with the government, that's never been the core of my identity, and I don't think it can be, or we really are going to struggle.
So for someone who's in the military and is a believer, particularly a younger person who's in the military and is a believer, how do you maintain that focus, particularly over a long career? How do you fight against the pressure to take on your military service as your identity? And it's, again, for people that would not have exposure to the military, there's nothing 9 to 5 about service in the military. There's nothing, someone walking into your office at the end of the day and saying, "You're going to be staying here tonight because we've got some things to do."
Oh yeah.
You do that. It's a very, very different world.
Yeah.
Right before my Iraq deployment, go back a few months, Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Eve, these were times that we were told, you are going to be here, not with your family, and we're getting ready to deploy, and you may not come home. but this is part of the deal. And so your identity very quickly, whether you acknowledge it or not, shifts that way. How, as a believer, do you keep it from shifting that way? How do you keep it where it needs to be so that you can continue your life when the military is over, which it inevitably will be at some point?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna pull a page out of the Jeremy Stalnecker book here, and I'm gonna harken back to one of the principles I hear you talk about periodically, or it's in your book, which is, while sometimes life may feel chaotic or overwhelming or whatever, what we need to do is usually very simple.
Yeah.
Did I paraphrase that fairly
Yeah, that's
accurately?
good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think here it's going back to the greatest commandment, which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind. if I'm doing that, then everything else is just falls into place, right?
Yeah.
It's if that's my vision, so my long-term kind of goal, I'm going to align everything I'm doing in now this journey in reaching that goal, not just what I, where I want to be at the end of the
Yep.
day or whatever, but every step I'm taking between now and the end of the day is going to be aligned with that goal. By the way, not saying that I executed that
Of
perfectly. There
course. Yeah.
were
Sure.
many,
Sure.
many times where
Sure.
God was not the focus, where, and a good test for me, to use your example, a good test for me was it's 17:30 and you're already feeling that pressure to get home because, you've got a family to get home to
Yeah.
and you're trying to have unless you're deployed and then, all bets are off. You're just
Right.
working
Sure.
24/7
Yeah.
until the beatings relent. Uh, but you're trying, and you've got good things that are on your mind,
Yeah.
but all of a sudden there's that knock at the door, and whether it's your boss or it's somebody that needs help, because
Right.
you may not have been a chaplain, but I am sure if one of your Marines knocked on your door and he had that look on his face like the bottom just dropped out, I
Sure.
know you would drop everything and be like, "What's going on?"
Yeah.
And in those moments, more often, more times than I would like to admit, there was this inner like reaction, like no. And I know as a chaplain, I'm not supposed to feel that way, and I'm not supposed to
Sure.
say it, but it's true. It's
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
true. And sometimes it's about articulating expectations and setting clear boundaries, and like realizing, okay, this is important to you, got it, and we can talk about this
Yeah.
tomorrow, whatever. But my point is, there's a lot of times where I just had to remind myself, why am I here? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And am I being faithful to God? And it's simple things like, am I taking time during the day to stop and pray? Um, or am I getting so wrapped around the axle that, it's a deployment and it's 22:30 and you're
Mm.
sitting there feeling like you've been at a full sprint all day. This is me,
Yeah.
by the way,
Yeah.
typing, because I did a lot more of this on some
Right.
deployments than I did, humping and or hiking rather. Sorry, I gotta get out of my 1980s mindset.
You're still transitioning. We're still in the
Yeah,
middle of the transition.
right. But anyway, and you're spinning, and it's like it's that whole thing where somebody will eventually come alongside of you, and they're like, the work will be there tomorrow, and
Yeah.
you're thinking that's not helpful. I got to get it done now,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
and then you look back and you're like, did I spend time in the Word? Did I pray?
Mm.
Did I just meditate on God's goodness? And
Yeah.
all I can tell you is that was a constant struggle for me. It's a human struggle, and I think it's just being aware of it and constantly attempting to recenter yourself
Yeah.
on where your identity should be. And the other thing I will just say, you asked what you can do. I would just tell you this too. I was blessed to have a dad. I told you he was a World War II vet. He also was one of the most magnanimous people you'd ever
Mm.
meet. I saw him in the presence of generals and politicians, and I saw him, on the street helping somebody who couldn't afford to buy their kids something from the store. And he was always the same person. And I think that's something that I cannot take credit for. I was just
Yeah.
the blessed recipient of seeing, and my mom was the same way too, but very much so. But just seeing my dad like that, a very successful man who was no respecter of persons that way. He would give his heart to everybody and anybody, and I think that helped center me as well.
Yeah, that's great. I've been thinking on this idea of abiding in Christ. The Bible talks about abiding in Christ. I'm reading a book. I'm working through the book. It's called, man, I had the title until I just was going to tell you what it was. With is the title. And again, it's the concept of we don't do things, above God or next to God or beneath God. And he goes through all of the different ways we can relate to God, but it's being with God and abiding in Christ. And the word picture there is so clear. And I think if we focus on just abiding in Christ and being with God, and I am doing things for God, but that's not my primary motivation. I'm hoping for things from God, but again, that's not my primary motivation. The motivation is just to be with God. And when we get a hold of that, it doesn't matter what else we're doing.
And there's since we're talking books, there's a great book that I just reread. I don't think I'd read it since seminary, which is going back a few years, but it's called The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. I don't know
Oh
if you've
yeah,
ever read it.
yeah,
So as you
great.
can see, it's a small book.
Yeah,
But
that's
if
my
one of
type.
your
Small book.
listeners are going, yeah, it's a great question, Jeremy. How do I maintain centered in my faith as primary? I would encourage somebody to pick up that book, because his whole thing was exactly what you just said. Is like, God is so less interested in our awesomeness
Yeah.
and our success,
Right.
and he's so much more interested in us.
Yeah.
And just, uh, we exist to please him. So whether I'm outside gardening, or whether I'm taking care of my daughter, or I'm doing something with a carrier strike group,
Yeah.
in some ways God's like, what you're doing is all fine. I'm interested in your heart, and I'm interested in
Yeah.
us right now, you and me.
That's fantastic. Um, Another challenge, I think, for those in the military, as it relates to identity, is the friction between their military life and their non-military life, maybe their family life, and those kind of things. And connected to what we were just talking about, I'd like to tell folks that you can't control what you can't control.
Yeah.
There is a lack of autonomy sometimes in the military. It's part of what you sign up for. Others are going to tell you what to do and where to be and how long to be there for. You can't control that, but you can control the time that's yours. So
Yeah.
what are you doing with the time that is yours? If it's with your family, you can't control your deployments, perhaps,
Yeah.
but when you're home, be home. You can control that time, so be home. And that lends then to helping your family understand how important they are to you. I can't control that, but when I'm here with you. But even in your relationship to Christ, it's the same thing. I can't control how many Sundays a month perhaps I'm deployed or out in the field. I can't go to church. But when I am home, I am going to be where I need to be. When I have time to myself, I'm going to read my Bible and spend some time in prayer.
Yeah.
How important to you over a nearly 30-year career was seizing the moments that you have and controlling what you can control?
I'll tell you, that principle right there, I have applied to almost everything in my life. I mean, it even applies when I'm talking with guys. And again, often you and I will talk in the terms of guys, because
Sure.
when you and I were in
Yep.
Marine infantry, we're only men, right?
Right.
So I'm not trying to be sexist intentionally.
Not intentionally.
Not intentionally, right? So, goodness, spending time with family was always a priority in my mind and in my heart. And somehow, once in a while, there was a disconnect. And I'll let me start at the end and maybe go backwards. So ultimately, for me, and I'm the world's worst recruiter here, so I apologize for that, for those active duty folk listening. About 3 years ago, it got to a point for me where, as I was assessing where we were at and where my family was at and what the Navy or the government was going to require of me for that next step, I was honestly, I had plenty of gas in the tank. I was enjoying what I was doing. I was ready to do another 10 years or whatever it would have been at that point. But as I was thinking about it, it was very clear to me that I had already made, that I knew I would be making a lot of sacrifices that I wasn't willing to make for the family, that I'd be sacrificing the family essentially, because of our situation. Again, others feel differently and take some of those same jobs, and they're like, there's nothing detrimental to my family. We adjusted, and that's great. But for me, I felt like I had to be present and be invested in my family, and doing that and continuing to pursue the next step in my active duty career, we're not going to work out. And so as soon as I just thought, it's that simple. Like, the Navy will replace me, like literally days before I leave, and people will start forgetting me. But my wife only has one husband. My daughter only has one dad.
Yeah.
And as soon as I thought about it in those terms, I mean, for me, I literally flipped a switch, and not even, in seconds. And I was just like, all right, what do I need to do now to retire? Which was weird looking back. Like, I was fully focused on the long game. And then it just all of a sudden, I was like, okay. There were times in my career where I did that well. but I think there were more times where I felt like I was failing. I don't know if I did or not. I know I tried to check that with Rhonda, my wife, and make sure that, well, what do you think? How do you feel? And I
Yeah.
know she
Yeah.
likes me being more available nowadays. So I know this was the right decision for us. But I can remember being I was with a Marine unit back when we were spinning like crazy because we were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we hadn't. The Marine Corps at that time didn't really own the fact that we were sort of breaking our people, which again is a whole other long kind of
Sure.
discussion as to
Sure.
what we were doing. But we were trying to fight a war on two fronts, and folks were just turning around constantly. Well, I remember going to my commanding officer at the time, who was a wonderful guy and a solid Christian, and one of my favorite commanders to have worked for in my 28 years, honestly. But I went to him, and when I was in charge of about a staff of at that time of about 18 people, and we were gapped about 3 officer billets, and I was kind of stretched up here to down here, and I said, basically what I said to him was, here's everything I can do, or everything that we can do if we're fully staffed. However, we're not. So tell me what you don't want done. What are your priorities?
Right.
And he basically, and again, this was a slightly different era. He basically just said, well, strap your backpack on really tight because it's going to be a long hike. And I was like, not sure that's the answer I was looking for, but I also understand that when I'm told what to do, I go do it. So Jeremy, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, for those years that even when I wasn't deployed, like a lot of others, it wasn't just me. It was 7 days a week. It was most evenings. That is probably, it's hard to know what I would have done different because I was trying to, I was wearing the uniform. I do what I was told. But I think there's times I did well. I think there's times I struggled with it and I failed. Thanks to God that, I've got a great wife who, like a lot of military spouses, was able to pick up the slack when I was gone a lot. I've got a great daughter who thankfully seems to be doing well and all that. But we've all got to just prayerfully make our own decisions about our time because we're told to take care of our families. We're not given a formula how to do that with our 24-hour days and 7-day work weeks.
What were some of the things your wife did during that season of your life to, to maintain, to grow, to thrive, to stay connected to you, to raise your daughter? Were there some specific things that she said, all right, because of our situation, I need to do this now, or was it just continuing to do the same thing?
Yes. So it was intentional, I'm sure, on her part, but it was also that we had ever since before I came on active duty, when I was a reservist and I was pastoring, I mean, we had a sort of not a policy, but a commitment in our marriage to not only make time for God privately, but also we had like small groups in the house regularly, and we were always part of our family of faith at the church or the chapel we were part of, and so for Rhonda, I didn't have to really be like, asking her lots of questions or trying to make sure she was doing the things that needed to be done. She was super engaged with the women's ministry, and she's always been very engaged in just trying to find ways to reach out to people and to serve them. And so when I was gone, I mean, it was hard for her, and there were times where I'm sure she wished there was more of me around, or at least more that she could do. But she and I have always been on one mind of that, as far as the importance of being integrated into the family of faith. And I think that's really what helped her get through it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. When you think about, transitioning and, your faith, your focus during your military service, your career, as you mentioned, has helped you through that, and you've maintained purpose and focus. A lot of folks, that would not be the case. If you're putting your chaplain hat back on, so someone comes into your office, Chaplain Mo, I'm transitioning. What are some things I need to consider? What are some of the things that you would tell them? Maybe now you tell them something different than you would have before, but someone's leaving the military. What are the 4 things or the 3 things or the 6 things they need to do in order to be successful?
Yeah. So one of the things I always do tell them is I actually have that conversation about identity with them, because I really do think that that's at the core of all of this. And you may not have it all figured out. Most of us don't. Some do. Some know that what job they're going to roll right into.
Right.
They know, hey, I'm going back home to Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm planting roots, and we'll figure it out. But most of us don't have it all figured out.
Sure.
But the one thing that's going to either help you or make it more challenging, I think, is who are you, who do you believe that you are? Because everything else is going to flow out of that. And so I'll have conversations with folks very specifically about, you wore this uniform. It's a great thing. It's been just a really meaningful season of life. But that's, while that may be part of your story and part of who you are, it's not your identity.
Yeah, that's right.
As evidenced by the fact that you're now about to hang this uniform up. The other thing is just the practical stuff of that. And I think our Navy and Marine Corps, and I'm going to assume Air Force and Army as well, do much, much better with than they did when you probably got out. And a lot of our enlisted in particular got out back in probably, between 2000 and 2009-ish. And that is, they have these great transition classes, and they do their best to try to help you prepare for that next step, to take stock of your skills, your abilities, identify gaps, whether that be certification gaps or education gaps or skill gaps or whatever. So, you figure out what you might want to do, you figure out what you don't have, and then you get that, and then you're able to step into the civilian world with confidence, knowing what to do next. And they help you with all the things like how to translate your military experience into terms the civilian worlds can understand. I think as long as you invest in those programs when you attend, I think they do a much better job now than we used to. It used to just be a bunch of lectures that were well intended but not very effective.
Yeah.
The other thing, the last thing, I think, you talk a lot about the whole issue of focusing on what you can control or affect, and not stressing about the rest. It's just identifying that, and people bring a lot of different stressors in their backpack from the military, their military experience, to the civilian world. And sometimes it's just a matter of, take some time to unpack that. And it's different for everybody. Even people who haven't been to combat have a backpack that's full of stuff.
That's right.
And so, for people who are retiring, I will recommend to, if you're listening and you're retiring because you've spent at least 20 years in, I would highly recommend, depending on the level of leadership you've been involved with, take 6 to 12 months off. And that seems like a lot of time, because nobody has 6 to 12 months terminal leave built to just continue making an active duty income. What I did was, knowing the time was coming, I started pinching pennies and saved some, and also had some terminal leave, and I would not have done it any different, Jeremy. I took about 3 months instead of the 6 months, but those 3 months I dedicated to family, and I said, I am not working. Like, no matter how many phone calls I get, no matter how much folks are trying to pull me into different, I am not doing work. I'm going to focus on my family, and they're going to get not just my priority time, they're going to get all of my time. Yeah. And it was great. We took some trips and spent some quality time together. And I encourage folks to do the same. But I know some senior level leaders who took a year off, and every one of them that said they did that said they did not regret it, because it really helped. There's this persona, you don't even know it, but there is this persona that you assume when you're a leader, and when you step out, it takes a while to almost sounds mushy, and I apologize, but it's almost to rediscover who you really
Mm,
are. And it just takes time for some of that to wash away. It's hard to know what the next right thing is to step into until you give yourself time and give God time to really
yeah,
sort of start to help you become, your non-military self again.
yeah,
And for those who aren't retiring, for those who may, or they're getting out after 3, 5, 10 years, I think all those principles still apply. It may be harder to take time off because you got to generate income right out of the gate. But to whatever degree you can prepare for that season and save up enough money to where you can take some time and really just
yeah.
mentally, emotionally transition and realign yourself spiritually, center yourself back on your relationship with God, I think it's critical.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Were there some perspectives in your heart and mind that shifted during that time off? Um, I don't know, maybe perspectives on your own service or your family or your future, something that you would not have seen if you hadn't taken that time?
Wow. Um, I think for me, the biggest thing really was just uh, in giving my family that time, which included taking trips to visit family back east um, and just going away on it was kind of reaffirming to me that I wasn't just paying lip service to that for
Right,
years.
right.
There were so many times, I mean, more times than I can count, where I was asked to do something, to attend a board meeting, or potentially to preach for somebody, or to lead an event, or to lean into this next business venture that I'm involved with right now, and or nonprofit venture. And because I just set in my mind, no, this time is for family, I was able to say no, no, no. And I felt a little guilty at first.
Hmm.
And one of the things that revealed is that as much as my mind was telling me something, my heart was still keeping me captive to false guilt,
Sure.
which I think really at the core is pride.
Mm,
Why do I need to do this? Why do I
yeah.
why do I feel guilty? Because I feel like I should do this. Well, why do I feel like I should do this?
Mm,
Oh, it's usually because it's not the other person, it's me. Like at some level, I feel like I
right.
am responsible for the success of
Sure.
something.
Right.
And no, sometimes you need to let people just either go find a different solution or be upset with you and say, well, I'm sorry you're upset. But
Yeah.
and I think that really helped me just
Mm,
link my mind and my heart back up, get them back in sync with
that's
what's
good.
really important. It was a good exercise.
Yeah, that's great. One of the, I think the things that's lost often in a period of transition is service. And, we call it the service, right? That's the military, it's the service. My grandparents used to talk about the service. I don't think we say that much anymore, but we're serving our country, we're serving others. When we're deployed, perhaps we're serving people that, don't even speak the language that we speak, but we're serving. We transition out, and now somehow it becomes all about us. We lose the heart for service because we're not engaged in it. And I think one of the things that you've done, we've talked quite a bit about this, but is continue to serve and continue to use the gifts that God has given you and the experiences God has given you to give back. I hate that phrase because it's like, what does that mean, give back? But to continue to serve and continue to minister and continue to use what God has given to you. Can you talk for a minute about what you're doing right now? And then, the process of deciding I'm going to continue to do that instead of finding a job where I can make a lot of money and it's going to be all about me now.
Right. Well, taking care of the family is a real concern for
Right.
everybody. I want to just acknowledge that too. Like making money, and I know you believe this, Jeremy,
Yeah.
but making money isn't an evil. In fact,
Sure.
it should be a vehicle. Um, but so I think it was the last time you and I talked, or we did a podcast interview. I think I was just wrapping up that limited series podcast that I was doing with Warriors Roundtable with the guys that I served with in 27,
Yeah.
uh, interviewing them about their 2008 deployment in Afghanistan. I did not go on that with them, but I came in right at the end, and that was one way I really wanted to continue serving. And so that podcast, it's something I may re-engage with, but what that did was it really kind of started the wheels turning, so that when God put it on my heart, you need to retire and continue serving these people you love, but in a different capacity. I was like, okay, well, how do I do that? And I
Yeah.
remember just taking time to take stock of my own experiences and skills. And in short, in putting those out on the table, it seemed like God was saying, hey, an opportunity, not necessarily a calling, like this is what you have to do, but an opportunity is, you love being outdoors. I love bow hunting and backpacking, and I enjoy doing retreats like I've done even through the Navy for years. So how do you take all that and leverage that experience to now do something in the civilian world? So I was going to start this new ministry. And it's funny, I'm sitting there having a conversation about 3 years ago with a buddy of mine who's a retired Navy SEAL, Jack James. And I'm telling him about this. I want to take folks out on these backpacking trips and use that kind of Spartan experience, being together back on a team, disconnected from the stresses and the tech and everything else, and use that as a way to sort of restore people's soul. And we had these long conversations, and then Jack moved away to Eastern Oregon, and we lost touch for a few months. And then out of the blue, I get this call like, hey, there's this camp down here, and they're doing exactly what you said you want to do, and they're looking for a director or a new director, because the gal, wonderful gal with just a big heart for combat veterans, Julie Wheeler, she started this nonprofit called Divide Camp. And I'm like, huh, really? So Julie called me, and a lot of conversations, but right now the mission is to come in as the new director this fall of Divide Camp and just continue to serve our veterans in a pastoral way, but not in church, but through the venue of the outdoors. So some ways, a very similar kind of mission to what Mighty Oaks is doing, and trying to reach our veterans now that we're out of uniform, and help them in their, not just their personal lives, but their marriages. But it's a different venue, obviously, a bit more rustic, being outdoors and at a camp or backpacking, and really using that experience that God provides in the beauty of the outdoors to be refreshed and renewed.
That's awesome. I'd like to remind folks, and I have to be reminded of this myself, but your experiences, whatever they are, good, bad, or otherwise, are not lost if you allow God to redeem them and use them. And sometimes we think that, I'll speak for myself. I served in the Marine Corps. That's all I had ever wanted to do. I was a Marine infantry officer. I ended up working at a church, and then ended up pastoring a church in the San Francisco area, not known as your bastion of conservatism, and not a lot of military around. And I mean, several times in that, the 7 years I was pastoring, I would say something like, God, why that other thing? Why didn't I just start here, the process of being here? And God brought those pieces together to where, I serve with Mighty Oaks, which is a lot of the ministry stuff, a lot of the military stuff, and God brings that together. And it's really important to recognize that God uses whatever pieces He's put in your life really to build what He wants built, if we'll allow Him to do it. And that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, because when I was talking about transition courses, and they'll invite you to look at your skills and your experiences and try to piece something together. But the difference as a Christian is that you and I have this conviction, this belief that God, our wonderful God, is crafting this divine narrative in each of our lives. And so when we pause and we take stock of what He's done, or what has happened to us, and sometimes including the bad stuff, or it has to include the bad stuff, because that all gets weaved in too, the way God redeems experiences. But we look at all that with this conviction, this belief that He's preparing me for something, and it may not be what I think it is. I'm gonna march forward. I'm gonna engage in some forward progress here, so He can start directing me. You can't direct a vessel that's fed in the water. It's got to be moving. But it's that conviction that He's going to take all this and He's going to make something of it. And so we don't have to go forward with fear or worry that he's got this plan, but he's hiding it from
Right.
us. And if we just, if we miss out on praying hard enough and
Yeah, right.
fasting, like he's going to hide it and we're going to miss it. Like, no,
Yeah,
he loves us and he wants the best for us. And he's crafting that narrative through
yeah.
us. It's neat.
That's awesome. I really appreciate your time and your perspective. I'm sure we'll do this again, but man, thanks for your service, of course, 28 years serving the men and women of the United States military, and then your continued service to the Lord and to those who have served. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your friendship. It's been great. It's been fun, at this time of your life for us to be able to connect, I think, on some things that we have in common, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeremy. You've always been such an encouragement to me. I mean, I've learned a lot from you, but every time I talk with you, I genuinely leave feeling like a better person. That may seem a little dramatic, but it's genuinely true, and I appreciate that so much. Thanks for having me on today. Let me
Yep.
talk a little bit about God's testimony through
It's
me
awesome.
and what He's doing in the future.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. For those of you that are listening or watching, thank you for doing that as well. And I trust that this conversation is a help to you. I'll say this about this particular conversation. Whether you know it or not, you know some folks, you have some people in your life that are dealing with transition, dealing with some identity issues, trying to understand some things. We all do our best to make it look like we know what's going on, but inside, most of us are struggling to one degree or another, and it's conversations like this that can open the door. So share this with someone that you know. Share this with someone who didn't serve in the military, but they're going through a life transition. Maybe something's happened in their life, and there's some transitions happening. Maybe they're trying to figure out what's next. Maybe they're in the military, and they need to get some of these lessons nailed down before they get to the end of their service. Whatever the case, take some time to push this out, and that would be awesome. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you next time.